Welcome. Today I'm going to show how to create a texture composition tile. So we've got a lot of familiar tools, parts of pen, stamps, found objects. Here's a sample I'm going to be using. So let's go ahead and get started. First thing I want to do is lay out my design. I've decided to section this off in asymmetrical areas that I'm going to put different textures into. I'll start out with the side of a key using the teeth. Now create overlapping layers. I like this edge and I want to reveal each part of it as I step down and slowly fade out into a smooth area. The next part, I'm going to need a little bit of clay. I want to build up a ledge, a transition from that key texture to a different, softer texture. Since my clay is all pretty soft, I can just lay this piece on without having to score it and slip it. Plus, I'm going to be pushing down. Blending the clay in. I'm using the edge of the tool, dragging it slightly. I want to see the edge of the tool after I make my mark and after I attach the clay. I'll put another texture on the back side of this, so I'm not worried about the transition at this time. How about clothespin? The corner of the clothespin makes a great right angle. And I'll layer those textures much in the same way I did the key, blending the transition between all three textures. When I'm stamping, oftentimes it'll interrupt the straight edge of the tile. I'll fix that later. Next, I'll move on to a stamp. This one looks like an F. I'm not worried about seeing the F on the tile after I do my stamp. This time I'm going to be layering so I can see the sharp angles of the letter. Repeating as I go, layering as I go. Touching up the edges, filling in the entire space. The next stamp I'll use is a flower stamp. I'm not trying to fill the space this time. I'm trying to leave some room. I'm going to be using part of the pen to fill in the spaces around the flower. I like how the roundness of the pen shape goes with the petal shape. To get this stamp to work right, I have to wobble it a little bit. Here I'll use the opening of my pen, wiggling as I go, just to make a slightly wider line, a lot more visible when the color enters the openings. Again, I left a little space for my third stamp, which is a Christmas tree, but all I want is the point of the Christmas tree. It's a nice sharp point, and when I lay it down and layer it, it creates a really cool series of almost dragon scales. Along this edge, I'm going to be building up another transition. You can see here in my sample where I've added pieces on. To add these pieces on, I'll take tiny little beads. Oftentimes these beads can be really tedious to make. So I'll make a coil of clay and tear the beads off the coil. This method is a whole lot quicker. I'm not worried about the size of the beads. You can see as I push the beads down, I'm distorting the shape of the bead, blending it in and attaching it to the background of the tile. You can see in the close-up, I just want the shape of the round on the back side of where I'm attaching the bead. I'll be putting some more in the row ahead of it. So I'm not so worried about what's going on this side of my texture. I'll ease that transition into my stamping after I'm done with my row of beads. So here I am with the fettling knife, creating marks that look similar to my stamping, just to make that transition to the other texture. And then coming back with the stamp, find some of those familiar shapes. You'll notice now that my tile is no longer square. From the stamping, the edge is a little less straight than I'd like. So I'll clean that up with a fettling knife. I can either do that while it's wet or after it's firmed up a little bit and leather hard. Once my piece is firmed up, I'll want to get it off the bat and onto the wire shelf so it doesn't warp. Once the tile is dried and fired, we can talk about how to use color to display these textures to their fullest potential.